So we're going to start with a slightly different format than normal because we have a frontline expert in the field. So we will do a sort of little interview to start this session. But welcome to all of you. As you can see, we are talking about beyond profit, navigating the landscape of purpose-driven metrics. Now, I'm Alana. I've been in sustainability for 20 years. I think from a personal reflection perspective, I think we should have been looking at metrics 20 years ago, definitely a decade ago, and I think we are playing a game of catch-up currently to try and make that happen. I'm just going to move around a bit because you won't be able to see me otherwise, will you? I feel like I've got my back to you all. So with all of that in mind, can you give me a hands up who works in sort of reporting metrics for sustainability? Is anyone reporting? So half. And people that are... So can I just get a show of hands of those of you that are in the organisation that has been mandated to report for sort of CSRD, TNFD versus those that are reporting for bids? So A for mandatory reporting and B for bids. A and B. And C, you're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. What's D? What's the other thing? Oh, you're consulting, okay. Okay, brilliant. So really lovely to meet you all. Would you introduce yourselves, please? That'd be a really lovely start. We've mixed up the order, so Carla's here because I'm going to interview her, but could you introduce yourselves, please?
Of course. Hello, everybody. My name is Carla Gautier. I am an architect from Puerto Rico, and I have a company called Conti Design Build Studio. We're an architecturally oriented design build studio that focuses on creating innovation through mixing technology and biological systems to create live homes. So we use upcycled and recycled materials to create modular structures that create resiliency against climate change and produce their own energy, water, and food.
Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Rupert Bull. I'm the CEO and founder of the Disruption House. We're a data and hay fever soon. We're a data and analytics business that produces assessments on sustainability and operational resiliency in predominantly private companies, although that's grown into small listed businesses. The reason we're doing so is the World Economic Forum said a couple of years ago that 70% of the world's emissions are coming from SMEs, and SMEs are least engaged and addressable by the consulting industry. So sustainability, I use the analogy, is a bit like curling at the Winter Olympics. Comes around every 4 years, and there's about 3 teams in the world that win the gold medal, and that's sort of Britain, Sweden, and Canada. So if the whole world wanted to become Olympic medalists at curling, there just isn't enough talent to build the teams. And the same thing happened with sustainability. It's really gone from being a minority interest sport to mainstream, and the human supply of really good experts is limited. And therefore, that resource is scarce, and because it's scarce, it's expensive, and therefore it's only really accessible by big corporates who can afford to pay for the expertise. So the majority of the world can't afford to pay that expertise. So we've built a platform that I use the analogy of climbing Mount Everest. Getting to the top of your game with sustainability is like getting to the top of Everest. To go up Everest, you need a Sherpa. But to go to base camp, you can walk yourself in, but most people need a sort of some form of map or guide to get to base camp. So our platform's been designed to get everybody to base camp, and in doing so, we remove friction as a cost and time impact, and that's really powerful for smaller businesses who, for the different reasons that Ilana said, putting their hands up, need to go on the sustainability journey.
Amazing, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matty Yetta, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for CGI. CGI as an organization was founded in 1976. We have about 91,000 consultants globally operating in 40 countries in 400 locations. As an organization, we provide consultancy advice to various organizations. As an organization, we operate in several industries, including banking, oil and gas, and several others. In addition to that, we are also thinking about sustainability within our operations. So from bids, we're also one of those organizations that have to report on TCFD and wider. Prior to joining CGI, I was with the UK government for 9 10 years as the head of sustainability within the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I also supported the Scottish Government and worked with the UN. So lovely to see you all here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Hi everybody, my name is Jack Dwyer and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Vira. We provide sustainability skills and capability to high-performing teams from companies like Octopus Energy to Janssen Sciences and my beloved Irish Rugby Union. As you can tell, I'm Irish. I'm personally driven by a mission of the intersection of human communication and sustainability. And I've spent years working in EdTech in countries like China and across Europe as well.
Many thanks, Sue.
Great. My name's Sue Riddlestone. I'm Chief Exec and co-founder of Bioregional. We're a purpose-led sustainability consultancy and we're a charity actually, and 30 years old this year. So yeah, I've been working on this a long time, just like you. And you can come and see us by the Food Systems Hub if you want it, and a couple of the team are here in the audience. So we started out doing our own, I'm a social entrepreneur, we started out doing our own sustainable products and services, building eco-villages, and then everybody else loved it. We won loads of awards, wanted us to help them. So these days we work with retailers, big food and beverage chains, so that's why we're doing a food talk today, asset owners, real estate developers and local authorities. And in line with our purpose, we also want to bring about this wider systemic change. So, for example, we get involved in processes like the UN Sustainable Development Process. So we were UN accredited NGO observer organisation working on the Sustainable Development Goals. Especially, we had a role in creating the metrics, the targets and indicators for Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. And we love to involve our partners and clients in that, so we took B&Q to the UN to present to the diplomats, which was very convincing.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So I hope you can all see that we have a wealth of knowledge on the stage here. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I will leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. If there's anything burning in the meantime, try and signal to me and we'll try and get to it. But first, I don't know if privilege is the right word because it's suffering that brings you to that position of privilege, but I'd like to lean into your experience to tell the story of sustainability that the world is really dealing with, because I think the global north, the people in this room, I can't speak to all of you, but we are very much in our silo taking data, dealing with the demands that are being put to us, but it's something that is not tangible to us, sustainable development. It's something that is, climate change is not something that we are navigating per se, even though it's starting to reach our shores. And it's not something, but that's the different story in other parts of the world. And your experience is very, very different, and I'm making assumptions, but the people in the room probably have. And I'd really like to hear a personal account of what you experienced and why you came to the business that you've come to. So perhaps if you could give us a bit of background, really.
Of course, thank you for that question. I think it's really important to bring this topic to kind of a little bit of a more human scale. A lot of the times we, like you mentioned, we're looking at the data, we're looking at how we can fix this, but we don't necessarily see why we're doing this, right? And I think something that's interesting for those who aren't sure, Puerto Rico is an island in the Caribbean, and it is basically kind of like the gateway to the Americas. But that also means that it is the first one to be hit when a hurricane comes in. Hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes have become the norm of the day, to be honest, in Puerto Rico now. And what happened in 2017, we had a hurricane called Hurricane Maria, and it was definitely the worst hurricane Puerto Rico has ever experienced in the history of the planet. And, I mean, show of hands if anybody has ever thought that a hurricane could be fun. No, right, exactly. I used to say that because when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I actually used to go surfing when the hurricanes comes because there was waves where there's usually not waves, so it was actually something that was not that terrible and we could live through. But nowadays, they have become so strong and so completely, basically unsurvivable for a lot of people. And after Hurricane Maria, we had 48 hours where there was no power, and we lost over 70,000 homes. That meant 70,000 families woke up and had nowhere to sleep, nowhere to go. And not only that, but the entire island was left without power for months. Some people didn't have power for over a year, actually. And a lot of people didn't have water. Hospitals didn't have power to survive. So people were literally, like doctors literally had to choose, like, who gets to live. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely don't want to be put in that position ever. It's kind of insane to think about. So what, you know, when you take a look at this, I think one of the most beautiful things that we saw within the tragedy, because it was definitely a tragedy, is that it kind of brought everyone down to the most basic human level. So it didn't matter how much money you had, because there was no food in the supermarket. So it's not about how expensive it is. It's just that there is none. It didn't, you know, your class, your preparation at that point had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know if my grandparents were alive for 6 days. That was one of the most, like, anxious moments of my life, and it was because there was no communication, no cell phone signal, nor normal phone signal, like no nothing, and we couldn't drive there because all the roads were covered by debris. So it really kind of brought the community together, and the only way to survive at that point was to come together, no matter who you are and where you come from. So that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind, because when we're working towards these sustainable development goals, we really need to look into that human scale and what we are really working for, and the fact that in the end we're all human and we all kind of need this to happen. Otherwise, I don't think human race is going to survive.
Exactly. And can you explain what it was like trying to live when the grid goes down? So for those months where there was a lack of energy, what does that look like to those homes, to those people, to those communities?
That's actually a very interesting question, because for me, I grew up, you know, with technology. So we kind of had to like start to figure out, all right, like, how do we cook? You know, how do we do these most basic things? And then when I finally was able to talk to my grandparents, they were chilling. They were like, oh, you know, like, we grew up with this, so we're just doing it this way we used to do it. And that kind of like brought an interesting realization to the panorama, because it really means that, like, in the end, we really need to kind of remember what it's like to just be human and not just survive completely on technology. And I think if we're able to do that, we might end up being able to use all this data to be able to make it helpful in the end.
And with all of the experience that you had, and I know that there was a lot around food and water shortages and coming together as a community, and I love the story about your grandparents. But this then brought you to create the business that you now have, and I'd like to hear a little bit about why you're having to build a transitional business, what that resilience looks like for the community, and explain a little bit about the business.
Yeah, of course. So during the hurricane, I had just come out of college. I had worked a little bit of time in Boston, and I decided to come back to Puerto Rico because I really was kind of missing like that sense of my work being for the community in one way or another. But to be honest, I had no idea I'd end up doing what I do now at that point. And then after the hurricane, I was actually working with FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the U.S., and we were trying to do an assessment of all the homes that were destroyed. It was obviously an army of people doing this because there was so much destruction. And myself, I visited around like 400 to 500 homes. And the sad part was that because of documentation problems, only 2 people out of those homes actually received the help that they needed from the government. So that was something that was extremely frustrating, and I just kind of sat at home at night and I was just trying to think, like, what can we do about this? Because we can't just be depending on the government all the time. We have to figure out how to be resilient on our own and how to build things better. The reality is that out of those 70,000 homes, they were mostly informal homes, which meant, you know, there's not an architect and engineer designing these homes. So people do it little by little, and it's a matter of economy. You know, they can't afford an architect. So we needed to come up with a solution that even if they were to go back to building on their own, we could teach them in a way that was actually going to be resilient and it was going to hold the next hurricane as well as the next earthquake and on and on. So that's when I started thinking, like, I actually lived in Germany for a little bit, and the first time I saw shipping container homes, I was really looking into it as kind of the green aspect of it, the upcycling, the recycling, and all that stuff. And then as I'm trying to look for solutions in Puerto Rico for the hurricane, I kind of remembered that, and I realized, I mean, these things are designed to be in the worst atmospheric conditions in the ocean for months. You know, they're experiencing the waves, which is the same movement as an earthquake. They're getting the typhoons, they're getting the hurricanes, they're getting salt, you know, like, and they're holding together. So if we can use these to build our homes, even if you start with something little and then keep adding to it, at least the base of your home is going to be safe. And I thought that, you know, the other reason is if we're going to come up with a solution, it can't be a solution that makes things worse. And the main material in Puerto Rico that we use for building and in the Caribbean is concrete. And I mean, we all know concrete is probably one of the worst carbon emitters as an industry in the planet. So I was like, okay, like we can't really just do a solution that's going to make the initial problem worse, because that's why we're having this hurricane in the first place. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg situation. And that's when I started really thinking into making what is now Conti Design Build Studio.
And everything is off-grid as much as possible, isn't it?
As much as possible, because the biggest problem we had was that even if your house was fine, you still didn't have resources.
Yeah. So I think this is just amazing. Like when we look at the big sustainability, I think this brings so much to life in one story of what we're trying to achieve on a global scale. So it's a macro impact of a micro, wrong way around, macro response to macro problem. So I just thank you so much. I think it's really important to get that sort of context in place. And as a result of these UN goals, as a result of the shift towards more sustainability, we have seen organisations, and we're going to move into sort of metrics part of the conversation now, making that make sense to businesses that want to be better, and for the big nuanced reasons that we understand for various different stories that we hear ourselves. It might resonate, it might be Blue Planet, it might be this story, it might be the UN SDGs. There's different reasons that we come to wanting sustainability, not least mandatory reporting. But Sue, can you, from your vast experience in this space, can you set the tone for us on the drive to purpose-led businesses and what that means?
Yep. And it was very moving to hear about what's really happening on the ground in Puerto Rico and what you're doing to solve that. Now, this audience and all of you, you're all professionals. I think you're here. You probably already know a lot about this, but I'm very much here to sort of set the scene for everyone else, perhaps. So, obviously, the consumer society that we live in and human consumption is driving this climate change that's having these terrible impacts and environmental degradation, with all the indicators going the wrong way. So the first thing I wanted to say about what's a purpose-led business is, on one level, it has to be providing something that people actually need, and maybe something that's helping people to be more sustainable, or a product that they need produced in a more sustainable way, or a service instead of a product. So I guess, in terms of purposeless businesses, that's one of the first things to think about. And we all need to make a profit. Everybody does. And so that one metric is very well embedded. You can look it up on Companies House. But of course, a purpose-led business needs to track more things than that. So we can take ESG as a sort of checklist for that. And thinking first of all about the E in ESG, so the environment. So there's a high-level metric that we really like at Bioregional. It's good for communicating. It's good for communicating the sort of scale of things and the key things we need to tackle, the ecological footprint. Because I know we're all crazy about doing something about carbon now, but we have to remember the resource impact and the impact that has on nature and people as well. So the good thing about the ecological footprint is it takes both together. And we're, as you know, probably the global overshoot, we're consuming 70% more than the planet can sustain these days. And there's Global Earth Overshoot Day, which usually comes around about the summer. And we're seeing the results of that in all of these terrible things that are happening in Puerto Rico and so on. And even here it's too hot. So what we need is one planet living where wherever we live in the world, whether it's the UK, Puerto Rico, we can all live well within the natural limits of the planet and leave sufficient space for nature. So that's very much a metric that we use. We need to try and achieve one planet living. And the good news that I can say about that is we found from our work, whether it's on products or in communities, how that's completely doable. We just need to do all the things that we know we need to do, and it can be profitable too. And there's a network of One Planet communities all around the world living that life. And metrics which can support the E dimension, obviously carbon, you need to measure your scope 1 and 2, which is the sort of basic, your bills and the things that are very tangible to you. But scope 3 and the embodied carbon impacts all the way down the supply chain is where a lot of work is happening now, and it's certainly what's occupying a lot of people we work with and ourselves. Nature, there's the forthcoming, or it's out now, the Task Force on Nature-Related Finance Disclosures, and they've got 15 core metrics, and there's one I like, which is quantity and share of natural commodities sourced from priority ecosystems split into types. So you can see there's going to be some specialisms here, but Alpro have started doing that and making changes to the soya milk and all those products that they make. Then thinking about the S in ESG, the social, a purpose-led business has to play fair and consider how it impacts society and people. And I just wanted to tell you there's a book which is old now, but it's really worth reading, The Spirit Level by Wilson and Pickett. And they did some research, and it feels very pertinent, especially to us right now here in the UK, that there are pernicious effects that inequality has on societies, eroding trust, increasing anxiety and illness. And they tracked the metrics of 11 different health and social problems, and through that they were able to prove that more equal societies almost always do better. And did you know that the UK is the second most unequal society in Europe after Turkey now, which is terrible?
It's shocking, isn't it?
And so as businesses, what can we do about that? So metrics that could track that could be gender balance in management roles, percentage of employment of local or disadvantaged groups, or metrics around conditions of workers down the supply chain. And then turning to the G in ESG, the governance, we really need the processes and systems in place so that we can track all of that. And so a purpose-driven leader will either found a new purpose-led company which provides something we actually need, delivers a fair profit and restores and regenerates our planet, and genuinely contributes to the happy, healthy society right from the start. But of course we've got many existing organisations, and then it's really about a change management process to achieve that, starting by understanding where those impacts arise, what's material, where the hotspots are, set some goals, make a plan, and allocate responsibilities to deliver on that. And so using metrics in people's performance, on their job performance metrics, appraisals is a really great way to use metrics to drive sustainability. And so there's a lot of increasing frameworks and initiatives like science-based targets and so on where they are setting some metrics they want businesses to use. And then that also gets pushed down the supply chain. But sometimes it's also good to think about what's material to you and how to set your own metrics. So just final point here, we work with Kingfisher Group, who own B&Q and Screwfix, and the third largest home and garden improvement retailer in Europe. And their ESG report came out yesterday. And the team worked so hard to collect and verify their data. And we also write their sustainable home product guidelines for the buyers to choose the products. So they've got a metric to track that, which is the percentage of sustainable home products as a volume of their turnover, which is currently 49%, going up to 60% next step. So now we're having conversations about, where are the next things we need to look at? So looking down the whole supply chain about sustainable metals right now. Amazing. So I hope that's given you some food for thought and some ideas and inspiration on how you can use metrics.
Thank you so much. And really getting into that nuance there, Rupert, I'm going to turn to you, because we're starting to see that obviously metrics are vital in bringing about measuring this change and changing the outcomes via those metrics. But what we're starting to see is the complexity of achieving this becoming very apparent to those that even have worked in sustainability, where all of a sudden with CSRD, and we will get into discussing the alphabet soup of it all in a minute, but we're starting to see that achieving sustainability where we're not borrowing from one natural resource to achieve another is complex. Can you speak to how your organisation helps with that, the complexity of that, and especially the role of SMEs within that space? Because I think it's something that's under considered really at the moment.
Thanks, Lana. Yes, I mean, I think where it comes from is that sustainability as a word gets used in two very different ways. It's often used by politicians, and they just really mean the environmental side of it. They mean the E piece. When actually, if you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they're about just transition. And the just transition is about taking the people with you. And actually, most of the UN SDG, the sort of global core indicators, are actually not E-related. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's maybe only 10 or 15 out of 170 are actually E-specific. So I think if we only focus on E, we're actually missing most of what the UN SDGs are about. And the UN SDGs are a very powerful tool to raise awareness, to represent the values that we have, to live on the planet, for the reason that actually the planet is there because we live on it. The planet is there today in the shape that it is because we live on it. And actually, we all got to where we are by all the things we've done in the past. So we have to recognize that human nature doesn't change very much. Human behavior can be influenced, but actually human nature, I studied classics university, it hasn't really changed in 2,500 years since people have been writing it down. So if we wish to achieve the outcome we need to achieve so that we don't have more Puerto Ricos and horrible scenarios like that, we have to influence human behavior because we won't change their nature. And that means we've actually got to take people on the journey with us, and therefore it has to feel fair to people. So actually, for big corporates as well as small corporates, we have one client that is a very, very large financial service organisation. It's a mutual. It's owned by most of the financial institutions in the world. And they have data centres all over the world. And they have one data centre in America, or in a part of America, that is on a coal-fired grid. And I didn't actually really pay attention to American energy production before. But there is no national grid in America. You are on the grid that you're on. So if the grid is coal-fired electricity, that's it. So your only choices are to get off that grid or to invest in a project to put in your own renewable energy sources. So they said to us, what do we do? And we said, well, you only have those choices from a pure E perspective, or you try and manage your emissions down in some other part of your organisation so that overall you're reducing your emissions. But the only alternative is to shut the grid down. Shut that data centre down. He said, well, we can't do that. I said, why? He said, well, actually, that data centre is in a part of America that is much poorer than other parts of it. Talking about inequality. We're the only employer of note in that area. So if we shut down that data centre, we put a whole bunch of people out of work who will never get another job that's comparable to the one we have. So he said, well, actually, you know the answer already, right? Which is, you're asking the question because it makes you feel better to have someone tell you the answer that you already know, which is you can't shut the grid down, so you have to do something about it elsewhere, or they won't get the money to put in a new renewable energy grid. And that's why ESG matters, because it's a compromise, it's a trade-off. But actually, if we can make everybody a little bit better, we make the whole world a lot better, which then leans into the SME perspective, because I don't think there's a single person here or on the planet who, if asked about it, doesn't want to live on a better planet. But there's a price to be paid for living on a better planet, which is changing behaviour. And most SMEs do not prioritise E because actually it's not material to the survival of their business, except for certain subsectors where it is very, very important because if they're putting in renewable energy infrastructure, then clearly it's a material part of their business if people don't move towards it. But most businesses actually in the smaller stage focus on survival because actually they think if I'm not here in 2050, I have no impact on the environment. So therefore, actually, I don't need to prioritise it because if I'm not here, I'm not impacting it. So the challenge is, how do you get someone who has to focus on surviving to actually start to do something about the E? Because they kind of think, well, I'm only little old me, I'm a 10-person business, I'm not making that much difference. But collectively, they are making a difference. So that's where actually bringing it together with E, S and G makes a difference, because the S and the G help you run a better business. Now, Rabobank did a study of 20,000 of their SME customers in 2021. And they found that those SME customers with a poor ESG score were twice as likely to be in arrears on their loan repayments as those with a good ESG score, all other risks being the same. And they sort of scratch their heads and they go, why is that? Is there a credit metric in ESG? And at the end of the day, they came up with the answer, no, there isn't. But what it is, it's a metric for a better run business. And a better run business is a better credit risk. So effectively, ESG is actually a free bit of management consultancy. It's a toolkit that helps SMEs run a better business. But if you only focus on the E, you don't get the better run business, because it is only a subset of running a business. Absolutely. So I think that's where we're seeing is actually, if you present it to the SME that they become a better business, and then it leads into the alphabet soup, which I know Matty will talk about in a minute. Actually, if you look at not UK regulation, not TCFD, but CSRD starts to look at S as well, right? So it's about the human bit within the supply chain and things like that. So what we're seeing is actually regulations are evolving, and actually smaller businesses have to get ready to report in the supply chain. We've assessed the UK market. We think 500,000 UK SMEs will be caught by EU supply chain reporting disclosure demands from January next year. Can you find many SMEs who know about it? No, because actually no one's talking to them about it, because actually they're not having it demanded of them yet. So there's a tsunami of demand coming, and actually the frameworks, and the EU's done a really good job of creating a voluntary support reporting standard for SMEs, where they thought through what does actually SME sustainability look like. And it's got a range of different stages, but at the basic level, it's about 15 things. So actually it's not the most demanding thing. So if we get everybody focusing on doing those 15 things, we'll make everybody a lot better. Absolutely. And then we start to come through. So I think it's really governments and regulations are undoubtedly nudging, but actually we've also got to say it's about self-interest. Because I think, again, the other statistic I use, I'm not sure I like it, but I use it, is B Corp's been in the UK since 2015. They have just celebrated, I think, their 2000th B Corp in the UK, which is a major achievement and should be celebrated. But there are 5.5 million businesses in the UK. Okay, so in 9 years, they've got 2,000 organisations to sign up, which basically means that's about the percentage of people who do it because they believe in it. Okay, everybody else does it because they're what we call pragmatically sustainable. Something is happening to them in the business life cycle that makes them have to do it, because it moves it from would like to do to must do. And I think that's really where the world is benefiting from regulation, but it won't just come from regulation.
No, thank you. And you've segued so brilliantly into what I want to ask Matty. Thank you. So Matty, you come from such a powerful and somewhat unique position, because you've worked in Are we okay to ask you about policy, given we're in election phase? It's historic.
I'm not a civil servant,
okay,
so...
Sorry, we just have to be careful now, because we're in the phase where so many people can't speak on so many things. So you came at this from working in government, setting these policies like carbon reduction strategy that has really filtered in. I think that's one of the most powerful ones that's filtered into SMEs understanding that they need to be part of a chain of reporting if they want to keep in with bids. So I'd love you to talk on that. And of course, the CSRD, the TNFD, all of this is the government-led, global governments often, levers for change. It's the stick, really, that enables us to move into it. And a big part of that I speak on a lot is greenwashing. And I think it's a really underrepresented lens for how we can see how to do it well if we understand how not to greenwash. So without leading you on the question anymore, I would just love your insight really into this top-down pressure and what we might witness over the coming years for SMEs as that starts to move down, and the greenwashing, etc., etc.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I was just writing down a few points as colleagues were speaking. I think it's important for us to highlight what a corporate maturity curve looks like, and then maybe respond to your question with that lens. So I typically use a maturity lens that, sort of measures progress on a 1 to 5 scale, with the first two being you're just doing the minimum that you can as an organization. As you move into level 2, you're sort of thinking about legislation, and I'm just about to respond to legislation. As you move to sort of level 3, you're going beyond legislation. Level 4 to level 5, you're starting to think about integrating sustainability within your corporate strategy, and then level 5 being it's part of your DNA.
So I'm more strict than you. I say that entry level is compliance. I'm kind
Absolutely.
of that's the ground level.
That's the ground level. It's just the minimum compliance. And so I think with that lens, we're seeing compliance as a key lever. I think when we are looking at what's happening with governments, not just the UK, but the EU, we're starting to think about legislation such as the TCFD, which is taking it a step further now. So initially we're supposed to sort of report on climate-related risks, but we're now starting to think about where does nature fall into this, and where does the supply chain fall into this, and am I thinking about climate-related risks within my supply chain? And this is where I think the shift is going to pivot a lot more to scenario modeling, and actually using different models to understand the impacts of risks across a short, medium to long-term strategy from a corporate perspective. So you've then now got to think about what does short-term look like for us, and does that align with my corporate objectives in terms of if your organization's short-term is a year, well, how does that align within a climate context? Now, thinking with my CSO hat, that's enabling me to challenge the strategy for the organization. Well, actually, how are we integrating climate-related risks and sustainability, short, medium, and long term, thinking about the 1.5 degree pathway, against the business strategy of actually your short term is a year. I'm thinking about, to 2050. So can we just get together and really make this work? Because if your strategy is to, for example, improve or think about AI, within a particular context, well, actually, I've now got to think about it from the perspective of what technologies and solutions are we going to be using that are going to be adopting AI? What does that mean from the consumption of carbon, and what does that mean for our clients, and then what does that mean for climate-related risks and so forth? So I think that's the first sort of legislation or mandatory obligation that I can think of. The second being DEFRA's new net gain environmental policy there. I think that's going to be a really key driver for organizations thinking about nature-related risks. Now, I think from a CGI perspective, I'm proud to say that we are on the pilot for TNFD, purely because we believe it's the right thing to do, and actually we don't have to wait for legislation to mandate that. We need to think about nature-related risks and how we can align those to TCFD.
I'm going to quote you on that. I love that.
And then what does that mean in terms of risks around the supply chain? I think my colleague talked about critical minerals there, and we're thinking about, well, actually, where are the minerals coming from, where the materials coming from, and what's the impact on the environment, depletion, and then how do we measure that? Then you get into the debates of, well, actually, how's the economic system actually helping us in the first place as well? We talk about GDP being a measure of wealth and performance within a national context, but actually GDP is really just a measure of goods and services that we're selling within a country. It doesn't capture things like intangible factors like tree planting or taking care of the elderly.
Raising women and raising children.
Exactly. So those things tend to disappear. So what are we saying about value? So we're thinking about, actually, we need help. We need help from government in terms of accelerating how do we get consistency in terms of measuring things like nature, how do we value them, and how do we change those economic systems to help us measure those with the right factors of value. You know, is it a pound, is it a dollar, what are we measuring? CSRD, colleagues mentioned, we're in the UK, we're impacted by the CSRD. We are thinking about parts of our business now that are needing to conform to the CSRD, as well as they're taking it a step further and thinking about supply chain social, which takes me on to the measures of social value that are now being mandated from a bid perspective. So if you're submitting a bid or response to any government department, you have to now think about how do you measure value from a social perspective, what is the return on investment from a community perspective, and the differences between Scotland, Wales and England. Of course, Scotland have a community benefits measure, whereas England think about it from a social value perspective. They're all saying the same thing, but the measures are different. So we've now got to look across 800 metrics and actually look at what's relevant, what's not relevant for the UK and so forth. How does that align to CSRD and wider? There's also things like PPN, which, as you know, has been an incredibly powerful, instrumental activity for organizations in terms of measuring and reporting on your carbon reduction plan. There's a new requirement now, the PPN 0524, if you've not picked up, that is now mandating that businesses should report at a contract level their carbon reduction plan rather than a corporate level.
Oh, that's I didn't know that. That's so interesting.
Right, it is. So now you've got to think about, okay, I'm just going to take a scenario that is quite maybe complicated for a few organizations out there, something like cloud or data centers. Right, how do you report on that from a contract level? You've now got to think about a shared model. We've got these organizations that are not disclosing data and information on the consumption on the cloud, because actually that discloses the amount of clients they have within the cloud. For me, that's important because then I can apportion my share of consumption on the cloud, and then I can apportion my share at a contract level. And so we are now thinking about, how do I empower the organization? How do I empower senior vice presidents that are saying, my business, I'm going to be losing a lot of business if I don't quantify and report on this at a contract level. How am I going to do it, Matty? So we're now saying, well, actually, I've got 10 business units and I've got how many sustainability personnel? How many are you actually expecting for me to sort of quantify it? And how many projects are we going for? So I've kind of now got to think about the role of technology and the role of how can I use technology to help my teams across the organizations and empower them to make these measures. We spoke about skills here and competencies. I think we're already seeing there's a gap within this space. There's only so many consultancy organizations we can have. So actually we do need to empower and educate employees.
So this is what I wanted to get, and we'll get to Jack on this as well, but I wanted to ask, so for me, that maturity index that you started with, that compliance only, that very stage 1 level ground floor is doing what you're told, and we're starting to see that beyond compliance coming with that double materiality of CSRD and a number of CSOs sort of saying this is way more complicated than we thought it was, and you're not telling us blow by blow what we need to do, so we're very confused. And stage 5 of that, embedding it into your organisation, becoming part of your DNA, that involves a lot of competency. That involves everyone in the organisation singing from the same hymn sheet and understanding what this means. Now, Jack, I want to get to you on this. Before I do, I just want to put in, I think the lens through which we look at greenwashing, to me, and I spent a lot of my time talking about greenwashing, I spent a lot of time educating organisations on greenwashing and how to avoid it, not how to do it, clearly. And what I think is, when you see an organisation, unless they're intending to greenwash, which we have seen a lot of, that organisation that's greenwashing, that to me is a huge red flag of a lack of competency. So greenwashing equates to a lack of competency or deliberate greenwashing. And I think most of it is happening because of the lack of competency. Jack, can you give us some context on education within the competency space and across organisations, please?
Yeah, I want to start by prefacing this with a very overused quote from management. Peter Drucker says, "What gets measured gets managed." And I want to focus specifically on how companies metricize sustainability. I'm like a lighthouse, so I've been in this unique position where I can see unique organizations of all types, shapes and sizes, good and bad. And I can see what they try to measure to advance sustainability. Now, assuming that CSRD and compliance is table stakes, as you've said, Ilana, I'm going to take you on a journey to look beyond that now. And I'll start by looking at the three different categories. So we're thinking about investors and your board, you're thinking about the company, and you're thinking about the planet. Now, here are some of the key metrics from each of these categories across all of the companies that Vira works with. And that I would say are unequivocally similar between all of these great companies. I know that everybody here who works in sustainability got into sustainability to make an impact, whether you're a consultant or whether you're a sustainability manager. But often you find yourself drowning in things like compliance and thinking, this isn't what I signed up for, right? So here are a couple of the high impact metrics that good companies have in these categories. So the first one under investors is ESG ratings. Whether it's CDP, EcoVadis, ethics-based, investors want to see a measure of your company against other companies in the market. This is common knowledge. But you have to accept that that's table stakes for investors, and you have to appease that. So whatever you need to do on the compliance side to appease that, you should do that. Second is something that we use and advise on our clients in a variety of sectors, is creating a picture of an ideal client. So if you can take something away from this, it's creating your 5-star client checklist. A 5-star client can be a client of any shape or size that has a variety of characteristics that makes it aligned to your company's sustainability strategy. Let's look at a couple of those characteristics as an example. Number 1 could be they're aligned to the SBTi initiative. Number 2 could be that they have a supplier code of conduct. Number 3 could be that they have an exclusionary policy. So an exclusionary policy is basically a policy that says, here are the types of companies that our customers say they're not going to work with. And you can spread this upstream and downstream, but it's an objective measure that enables you to push your sustainability beyond internal business as usual. Other aspects of 5-star clients could be unique to your business. It could be something around productizing sustainability as a service or in your physical goods. But think of all of the characteristics of the types of clients you would like your business to work with. And then when you're going back to report on that, it's about this concept of revenue attribution. So what that is the percentage of the money the business accrues from a particular type of company. If you're able to go back to your investors and your board and say, we have got 90% revenue from companies with these 10 fantastic characteristics, that's sustainability in action. That's sustainability in motion. And that goes beyond your reporting capabilities. Looking at some other characteristics or metrics that we need to look at the company level, let's use near-term science-based targets as an objective measure of where we want to get to, so 2030 or 2028. When we look at pure play carbon emissions reduction, often board members in companies are measured by reaching the net zero target, right? This is a pretty restrictive and crude way to measure a senior leader in a business on sustainability, because if they're on a 90-day reward cycle, they're not thinking about 2028 or 2030. And you might be able to resonate with some of these things where the metrics are so crude and hard and in the distance that it's very hard to get people who aren't CSOs bought in. But using your 5-star client checklist, you can then attribute different metrics within the business to people who aren't CSOs. So if it's revenue attribution, your chief commercial officer can get involved with that. We don't need to measure a chief commercial officer on their ability to help the company reach net zero. We need to judge them on their ability to bring in the right type of business. And the same goes down across this list, whether you have a procurement or supply chain manager. It's measuring them on the number of supplier code of conducts that have been delivered and the number of suppliers that are actually compliant with that. Finally, I want to look at the last category, the third category I mentioned, which is for the planet. A lot of sustainability people here today might be familiar with upskilling and learning about the voluntary carbon market and its sometimes questionable integrity. It's still nascent and evolving, and what we want to understand is what are the projects we can align with so that we're not greenwashing and we're not doing reputational damage to the business. One really strong metric, which I see across a lot of the large companies we work with from 1,000 scale to 10,000, is the percentage of revenue invested in local and regional biodiversity restoration projects. So removing voluntary carbon market off the table, we want to see companies actually investing in nature. And this is a really good metric for businesses to do that without going and saying, hey, we invested 20% of revenues last year into a carbon offset project in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Amazon, in any part of the world, right? These are things that we can't see and feel and touch and measure. And that's what metrics are all about, right? So those three categories, if you can think of them broadly, but if I was to end this, I would say focus on that list of ideal characteristics of a client you'd like to work with. And finally, the amount of revenue that the company is investing into nature. Slowly that can evolve into the voluntary carbon market, and as the integrity increases, the business should be able to align with these things, but it means that you're not stuck today between not doing anything and wishing you were investing in doing what the whole purpose of this is, which is restoring biodiversity and nature.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm getting given the 5 minutes, so I want to make sure that we've got time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Can we get a roving mic, please? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you all. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing all of your different perspectives. And I had a question around consumption. And Sue, I think you said it at the very beginning. You were saying, well, our problem is we consume too much. And you all spoke quite a bit about business and the nature of business and the role of SMEs. How do we change our overarching patterns of consumption in the global north? I mean, this is quite a fundamental issue. You can tinker around the edges of your business model and you can offset your carbon emissions. But the problem is we're consuming too much from a societal level. What are your thoughts? How do we change that?
Well, I think there's a lot of companies emerging, like Depop, where you can get secondhand things, apps to share things amongst your neighbours. So what our economy will look like, I've been reading books about it and trying to get a handle on it, and you get all the way to the end of the book and it still doesn't exactly tell you. But I think one thing I've found after 30 years work in the sector is we're like people going ahead without a flashlight. We know what all the issues are, and we just have to go on that journey. And if we're entrepreneurial and we can start up our own things, looking for ways to help customers, to help residents to be sustainable, these are things that people will pay for in some way or other. There's ways to monetize it, to make a living out of it.
Absolutely.
But we do need to think about business in that way, I think.
Absolutely, and that's part of the paradigm shift that we're looking at is and I would suggest that everyone looks at post-growth and beyond growth, these sorts of movements. I think they're really interesting because they look at huge economic models rather than individual responsibilities. So I think that's important to put that context in there. I'm conscious that we need to wrap up. And is there any other questions? One here, please. Thank you. But yeah, it's a really big problem, and we need to deal with it. But the mandatory reporting starts to deal with that because it brings circularity into its real phase rather than it just being part of that phase that we've seen so much sort of greenwashing around? Please.
Hi, I'm Kruti. I'm a student in sustainability, and as a student, I sort of live in this ideal world where sustainability is of utmost importance. But I realize it's not like that in the real world. But my question is mostly for Matty, because you've worked in at a national level. What is a purpose-driven metric on a national scale? Because GDP, as we know, is a flawed metric, so to speak, because it chases infinite growth in a finite system, and we've seen GNH in Bhutan, which is also a failed metric because it's resulted in a lot of unemployment in Bhutan. So what could be another metric, maybe on a national level?
That's the $1 million question, right? I think there's quite a lot of research. My PhD area of research is specializing in different measures for nature. Now, if you look up the UNEP are developing measures in, it's called SIA, which is nature-based accounting, that's looking to develop values that can be incorporated into the World Bank and IMF and bankers area. So there's a lot evolving now from a nature perspective. If you look up the SIA, nature-based accounting and natural capital-based accounting. From a social perspective, I think we have a wide range of measures there, from education. I feel like that's actually, in some areas, a lot more evolved. We've got education, health, and wider. I think the key fundamental issue is how do we integrate those measures so that they are aligned consistently to measures like GDP. I guess this is a whole big, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you after this, but, do we replace GDP? Do we substitute it? Do we use GDP alongside other measures? I think those are all discussions that are happening now at an international level.
Thank you. I'm going to do 30-second wrap-ups for everyone, so if you can include your add-on in the wrap-up, it'll be very strict. Yeah, definitely.
The Office of National Statistics had started to have some shadow tracking on a wellbeing indicators, so you can have a look on the UK ONS. And it's in the Sustainable Development Goals text to look for these alternative indicators, and UN stats have got a process where they're sort of surfacing them. Just to sort of build on what I said to you, I think we all got different areas that we work in, but it's just finding our way forward and, being real and being authentic and looking for the opportunities. There's a lot of business opportunities here, but also we need to learn to live well with less, and actually that makes for a happier life anyway. And I think we can all still do business in that way too.
Thank you. Jack, 30-second final thoughts?
Yeah, so I'd say to anyone working in sustainability or any consultants that are advising businesses, give people the advice that they need to build their internal team of super champions, a resource group with a shared belief in going beyond compliance and making a real impact. And you're not going to be able to do it by yourself. You're going to need other people who share that belief. But I fundamentally think that most people here want to make an impact in some way. So find those champions and go beyond just reporting.
Yeah. 30-second roundup.
And I can talk for days, but I think I would like to say to all of us, I think we're all sustainability experts. I think we are going to need to build quite a lot of resilience. I think we are going to be needed to navigate corporations, individuals, and stakeholders to the future that we want to see. And the final point I'd like to make is let's really focus on a systems approach. Actually, we shouldn't just focus on one area or another. This is a deeper fundamental issue, including our young children and education and wider. I think we need to think about the whole systems approach as a way to navigate this topic.
Thank you. Rupert, 30-second final thoughts?
Thank you. So I'm going to say 2 words and then a few more. So I think education and, if you forgive me, incentives. So I think there's an awful lot that can be done, and particularly when you're getting into the smaller end of the business supply chain. And so, excuse this shameless plug, but we've actually partnered with Lost in Town, who are a small startup brewery. They're taking our assessment now so they can actually from the get-go become a sustainable business. Now, actually, we've also got a little quiz, which actually is an educational quiz about why ESG could affect your business. And if you come to our stand D220, take the quiz, take away a can of beer, and actually enjoy what will be a sustainable
That is a
SME
great
business.
closing plug. 30 seconds.
Can I use my 30 seconds for a quick question?
Yeah.
Right. I think I really appreciate this entire conversation because I've learned so much from you guys, so thank you. My question would be more like, as somebody that started a company embedded into these goals, but a lot of the times we find ourselves kind of in the do, you know, it's kind of stuck in how do we even get this done? How would you guys think that we can start measuring these things, knowing that maybe at a startup level you really have not a lot of resources to be able to do this? If maybe one of you could answer that.
I can answer it, but I'd be reflecting what Matty said really earlier, which is use the double materiality process of CSDR and TNFD as your foundation block, and then you will always be looking at the biggest picture of all, and you might not be able to provide all the measures, but you'll be aware of all of them. So I'm going to do a round up myself, just because I've loved the flow of this, and I think it's where we need to think about sustainability, in that you must think about the big picture and the choices that you're making and how that affects other people when it seems hard in your business. Some people are living in the front line of this. And then we must think, if we're making a purpose, make sure that makes sense. Make sure that purpose aligns to planetary boundaries, that it's not something you thought up on a beer mat one day and thought it would make sense or it would sell stuff. Really think about it. Find the data to back it up, but go beyond the data. Go beyond compliance. Make sure you're understanding what the strictest, the most ambitious sustainability targets are that protect people in the front line of this, and really try and work to that all the time. And the best way you can get to level 5 of that, to embed that across your culture, is knowledge. Is to make sure that you really push knowledge across everyone. It's an absolute asset to train everyone within your organisation, not just one team, not a few people. Make sure everybody is upskilling around this. And especially to your point, we want people coming out of university to feel that they have, or coming into the workplace in general, that they can use their agency to drive change. You must be able to have a voice that says, this isn't good enough and we demand different. So thank you so much to all of you for coming, and I hope it's been a really valuable conversation. You're all amazing. Thank you so much. We have a membership. If anyone wants it, come and see myself or Liz and have these conversations more. Thank you.